Peter, welcome to the Leaders Who Care series.
Happy to be with you.
Yeah, it was great to meet you the other week, and I think I mean most people already know you're a leader who cares, but now we're just gonna put a little extra proof behind it or something like that. And great to see you here. I guess the best place to start, as we always say, is if you could briefly introduce yourself. And I always have to put an asterisk for men, especially on that, because the question is, can you can you briefly introduce yourself, not like what you do and all that, but where you're from originally, where you are now, as much as you feel comfortable talking about family. Maybe there's something you've never told anybody that this is the place you want to reveal it to, stuff like that, and then we can get into the business part.
Sure. Well, I'm talking today from New York City, from Manhattan, and an interesting coincidence. I'm talking to you from the same building where I have lived since I'm 6 months old. I have never moved. I have. It was a place I grew up with my parents, of course, and now it's an apartment where I live right here in Manhattan, and happily so. Um, and even though I also live in Los Angeles, and I spend the bulk of my time in the air, this is truly home. It's my neighborhood, it's my community, it's where I learned everything, at least to get me ready to learn everything else. And so that's one thing. So I'm a born and bred New Yorker. I firmly believe that if everybody has the chance, they should spend at least 1 year of their life living in New York City, because while they may not like it, it will teach them how to be streetwise on a global level. You may not know where to go, but after that 1 year here in New York, you'll certainly know where not to go.
No kidding. I love that generational aspect. We do a lot of work in generational health, and what an amazing story. Since 6 month old, you've lived there.
That's right. That's right. And so, it's interesting because when they have a meeting of the board members of the building where I'm living in, and I say something, and somebody says, "What do you know?" It's the perfect opening for me, saying, "Well, because I think I'm the longest living person in this building."
Wow.
No, I take that back. I am the longest living person in this building.
So you know where all the nooks and crannies and all the stuff that happened in this floor and that floor and that floor.
Well, it reminds me of an appearance by George Burns on The Tonight Show when he was 100 years old, and he came out smoking a cigar. And Johnny Carr says, "George, you're 100 years old. You're smoking a cigar. What does your doctor say?" And without hesitation, Burns said, "My doctor's dead."
Yeah, that makes sense, I guess.
So that's where I am in the building.
Okay, great. Well, what were you well, first of all, you have kids?
No, no kids, an amazing wife. I got married late in life, and I think that was a really good idea, even though there was nothing planned about it.
Hmm.
Um, we just celebrated our sixth anniversary going on seven. We've known each
Nice.
other for 10 years, but I was lifelong single, so was she. We never thought we'd ever get married until we met each other. Then all of a sudden, it was sort of like, why not? Why aren't we doing this? And we have, and best decision I ever made.
No, that's awesome. When I hear that type of story, it says, it like what was the movie? It said it could happen. It could happen.
Yeah,
So,
good.
so what were you like as a kid then, and as a teenager? Were you a big reader? Were you an explorer, or what?
I was not a big explorer, although I give my mother a lot of credit because she got our family out traveling at a very early age. I mean, I went to Europe when I was 12 with my parents, an unforgettable trip. And so she and I come from an aviation family. My grandfather was the original star reporter for William Randolph Hearst in California.
Well,
And then in 1939, he left to become the assistant to a guy named Donald Douglas, Douglas Aviation. And so when I was growing up, I grew up with every airplane model ever. And it sort of, impacted me. I still have on my wall a certificate that was given to me. I have no recollection of it, of course. Uh, Hold on a second. I have no, are you still there?
I
Yes.
am. Yep.
I have no recollection of it, of course, because I was 6 months old at the time. But I took my very first flight on an American Airlines DC-6 from New York's Idlewild Airport to, hold on a second, from New York's Idlewild Airport to Los Angeles. Not the world's shortest flight in those days, but when we landed, the stewardesses, they were called stewardesses then, and the
Right.
captain gave me a certificate making me the first member of the American Airlines Sky Cradle Club. Hold on, I'm sorry to do this. I just have to,
That's all right.
I'm gonna have to call you back, okay? I'm gonna call you back. Okay. And so I became the first member of the American Airlines Sky Cradle Club. I'm still waiting for my benefits, but in any case, I've been traveling from a very, very early age, but I was never traveling professionally. I never thought of it that way. That came much later. But when I was growing up here in New York, I was given the perfect definition of a well-rounded education. First of all, I'm in the middle of the city. Uh, I'm a public school kid, which my parents believed in, and so do I.
Hmm.
I went to, I mean, I went, my greatest claim to fame as a public school kid was that in 1961, I went to junior high school. It's still there, and it was one of those tough schools that was made up of 98% blacks and Puerto Ricans. And uh, and my greatest claim to fame to this day, and I'm not exaggerating, was I became one of two white kids to make the baseball team. That to me was the greatest accomplishment ever. I'll live with that till I die, and even after I'm gone, I'll still be thinking about it. Um, and and in those days, uh, I was a what can I say? I was a discipline problem in school. Uh, I believe then, as I do now, that if somebody tells you something, it's okay for you to ask why. And if they give you a really good answer, believe it. But if their answer is just because or that's our policy, don't do it. So you can imagine. Let's put it this way: when I about 2 years after I graduated from high school, my mother sent me a message that the administrative assistant at the high school, who was the disciplinarian, was retiring, and they were asking if everybody would like to contribute to his fund. Well, what I had kept in my dresser drawer were about 300 detention slips where I was sent to detention by this guy. And so what I did was I came back to New York, found them in my dresser drawer, and FedExed it to him saying, "With love." That was my contribution to his fund.
Nice.
Um, and by the way, that philosophy has kept me going till this day. You know, if I'm driving and pulled over by the cops for speeding, and they say, "Do you realize there's a speed limit of 65 miles an hour?" And I say, "Could you tell me why?" And their answer is, "Well, we've done the research. At 66 miles an hour, you're going to die a fiery death." My answer is, "Wow, thank you for telling me. I'll drive 60." But if their answer is, "It's our policy," or "Because," I'm going 80. Come catch me, because you haven't made your case. And
Right.
so I learned that from my mom from a very early age, among other things. And it's something that's stuck with me till this day. It's made me a better journalist, of course, but it also allows you to engage in conversations that you otherwise wouldn't have because you don't let them off the hook when they say it's their policy or just because you engage in a conversation and get to the bottom of it.
Certainly makes them think as well. You know, it's so funny because so many executives I talk to have told me they base their whole confidence foundation of their confidence in their roles now from the one or two moments they had as kids that happened, whether it's a
Of
coach
course.
putting them out on a special moment or whatever it may be.
Although I will tell you that the moments that I had as a kid that I remember now that shaped me, I didn't believe back then. Uh,
Hmm.
my mother said to me one day, and now of course, you find out later that mothers are always right.
Pretty well.
But at the time she said this to me, she said, "I want you to remember this. It's more important to be interested than interesting."
Right.
And you know what? We had a rule in our family. Back in those days in New York, there were 8 daily newspapers in Manhattan. I can still name them. The Daily News, the Times, the Post, the Mirror, the Herald Tribune, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, of course, and the Journal American and the World Telegram. I think it's 8. And and my mother subscribed to all of them. And the rule was when I came home from school, I had to read them all because I couldn't come to the dinner table without something to add, as my mother would say, to the dinner time conversation.
You had to read them all?
Every one of them.
Oof.
And guess what? That has stood me in so well in every year since because I always have something to talk about now.
Yeah, I think between that and listening is probably great attributes, and good for her. You didn't just sneak into one section of each newspaper. You read the
No,
whole.
what you learned how to do very early on was to realize if there was going to be a good story in the paper, where would it be? It would
Mm,
not be in the classified ad sections. Hardly ever was it in sports. The movie listings, throw them out. Entertainment news, garbage. No, I went for all the other sections of the paper. And I watched my mom because my mom, her idea of a conversation was my idea now of a conversation. It was not based on a transactional relationship. It was based on keeping in touch. And she would make a list every day of who she wanted to talk to. And I was always fascinated to see who was on that list. And of that list, 80% of the people on that list were people who just hadn't talked to. I just wanted to say hi. She had
mm,
no agenda. The other 20 might have been the dry cleaner or somebody she wanted to, talk about a project she was working on because she was also a writer. But the other 80%, and I just and she just engaged them in conversations about them. And that's what I do now. I have a list. I mean, every night of about 100 people I want to talk to the next day, and 80% of them are people I'm just saying hi to. I have literally no agenda. It's basically it's how you maintain relationships. It's how you nurture them. It's how you care for them. It's how you learn.
yeah,
And every once in a while, the timing is impeccable without you realizing it. And the next thing you know, you're both embracing an amazing idea that you get to pursue. But that's how it all started. So when I went to the University of Wisconsin
hmm
back in 1967, people need to realize that, today kids apply for 85 colleges. If you're a public school student in New York, you're only allowed, other than a state school and a city school, to apply for three because they didn't have a budget with the Board of Education for the guidance counselors to fill out the applications. It was as simple as that. So you only applied to your three schools, your impossible school, your maybe school, and your slam dunk school. My impossible school was Wesleyan back in Middleton, Connecticut,
hmm
which was then all boys. My maybe school, only because so many kids who were a year ahead of me had gone and loved it, was Wisconsin. And my slam dunk school was NYU downtown. You have to understand, I went to the Bronx High School of Science, another public school here in New York, but I got in completely by accident. You had to, in those days, and today as well, there are 5 or 6 specialized high schools in New York, and you can go from any borough if you pass the test. There's music and art, performing arts, and Hunter and Stuyvesant and Brooklyn Tech and Bronx Science. And so I really wanted to go to music and art because they had the cutest girls.
of course.
Uh, uh, and but my parents wanted me to apply for Bronx Science because they promised 100% college admission. So you go to take the test, right? So I go to take the test at Bronx Science, and you bring your number two pencil. It's multiple choice. You're in the cafeteria with test monitors, and there are 200 questions. And you may remember a question like this in any test that you used to take. If a train leaves Philadelphia, going to New York, going 25 miles an hour, and another train leaves New York going to Pennsylvania, or at what point do they hit, right? And that was not on this test. On this test was if a train leaves New York going at 30 miles an hour carrying 200 tons of super liquid cooled hydrogen at minus 30 degrees Celsius, I'm like, I am so lost. And I'm on question number 8 when I hear the proctor go 10 minutes. So I took my number two pencil and I just filled in blanks, B, C, A, D. I didn't give a crap. I was dead. I was done. I then go to take the test at Music and Art, which is about the liberal arts and literature and social studies and history, and I'm like acing this. I mean, I'm like going so fast, I can't believe myself, and I'm finishing everything in the essays in the blue book in the cafeteria. 25 minutes before the test is over, I'm done. I've styled this thing. I've aced it, and I handed him my book, and I'm thinking, man, I get to go home. And the guy goes, "Where are you going?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, since you're the first one to finish, now you can do your audition." My what? It was you had to say whether you were a musician or an artist. I had played piano, so I put musician, but nobody had told me I had to do it a performance.
Right.
So I walk into this room with one solitary Steinway and four East German music teachers sitting there going, Mr. Greenberg, what have you chosen to play for us today? And I said, well, it's an original composition. I wasn't lying. And so I sat down at the piano and I just started making shit up. And I lost all sense of time. And sooner or later, it hit on me, find a coda and end this, right? So I did. I stood up and I figured, okay, I'm screwed at Bronx Science and I'm screwed at Music and Art. I go home. Guess what? Lucky. I become a National Merit Science semifinalist at Bronx Science because I scored the highest on the test, knowing nothing I just picked. I didn't know. And I got into music and art based on my piano. So I figured, great, I get to go to music and art. No, no, no. My parents sent me to Bronx Science, where I proceeded to be tutored in every possible course other than English. Um, so when it's time to leave Bronx Science, I had like an 88 average, which put me 700th at a class of 800 because they worked out the averages to four decimal spots. This is Bronx High School Science. So there are your three colleges, impossible, maybe, and okay. And so I went to my interview at Wesleyan. My dad drove me up, and I'll never forget sitting there with a guy with his tortoiseshell glasses, his Guy Lombardo bow tie, looking at my application, going, "And so, Mister, is it Greenberg? Is it Greenberg? And you want to come here?" I mean, obviously that was not going to happen. Uh, and then I went out to the University of Wisconsin and toured the campus and did an interview there and just loved it. And then NYU downtown, that was the slam dunk. All right, now it's April, time for the letters to come in. I get a letter from Wesleyan, one of the most beautifully crafted letters on the planet, talking about what an example I was of wonderfulness in the community and how I was a star and a celebrity and all these things. Somewhere in that letter, there were four words. I couldn't find them, but they were there saying, "You can't come here." Uh, my mother had to show me. So that was depressing.
Yeah.
And then out of nowhere, NYU turned me down.
Hmm.
Wisconsin accepted me, and I'm here today doing what I've done my entire life because of that school. I owe them everything. Um, and so here I was, this, barely graduate from the High School of Science, going out 983 miles west of the Hudson River to see my first cow at the University of Wisconsin, not knowing anything about even why I was going to school because it was ordained, you're going to get a BA, whatever that was. And I got there, and there was a pivotal point because there were then 33,000 students on the campus. Today it's close to 60,
Yeah.
but then it was 33,000. And if you weren't careful, you're just going to get lost. So I asked around, what should I do? Could I get involved in so I don't get lost? They said, well, either go pledge a fraternity or join the student paper. So I walked down a fraternity row. I'll never forget this. And there were four sorority girls standing on the lawn of their sorority house in their knee socks and saddle shoes and villager outfits, holding mugs of beer, singing, "Daddy wanted me to be a Kappa." And I ran to the student paper. Uh, and I got there to give you an idea of how my political consciousness was zero. What I didn't know and had not done my homework, and most people don't even know this today, but the University of Wisconsin was the most violent, the most anti-war committed campus in America, more than Berkeley and Columbia combined.
Wow. Wow.
We had the National Guard on campus for like 2 years. Um, and so I walked in that day to the student paper going, "Oh, I'd like to join the paper." Well, that was the day of the big Dow chemical demonstration. Remember, Dow was making napalm, an integral part of our terrible exercise in Vietnam, and everybody was protesting. It turned into a huge riot, 165 people in the hospital. I walked into the college paper, the glass in the windows there were already broken, the tear gas was everywhere. There was only one person left. And we were sort of the paper of record in that capital city of Madison, Wisconsin. I didn't know that either. And I said, "I'd like to join the paper." And the guy behind the desk said, "Okay, you want to join the paper? Then good. You cover this because you're the last man standing."
Oh,
And
no.
so I did and wrote arguably the worst piece I've ever written in my life and the first piece I ever wrote in my life. I mean, how the only reason why it was published was because I had nothing else to run, but it ran on the front page. And the next morning, I woke up in the dorm, and before I could even get to the cafeteria, people were saying, "Hey," because they'd all read the paper that day. And I said, and I basically, you know what? I think I found where I need to be. And uh, and that started my career. And the rest, as they say, is history. But I should tell you that we were such a front page story all across America that within 4 months of my joining the paper, we were the evening news lead story on CBS and ABC and NBC. The mainstream media were completely focused on the campuses in revolt, especially us. And then I get hired to be the campus correspondent, a
Mm,
stringer for Newsweek. I was paid the princely sum of $20 a month.
mm.
And prior to my arrival, people who preceded me as the campus correspondents maybe did one story a year that they contributed to a much bigger story of something like, our culottes back on campus or what's new with rugby. I mean, there was nothing ever got done. Now we were front page news. And the next thing I know, Newsweek was sending me everywhere, not just in Madison. I was going back to Washington, D.C. I was covering demonstrations everywhere. And I embodied the old, Mark Twain line that I would never let school interfere with my education. And, uh, and by the time I was a junior, I was hired by Newsweek,
Wow.
and I became the youngest correspondent in the history of the magazine while I was still in school. And that obviously dramatically changed my life because I'm doing cover stories and I'm 19 or 20.
And you were able to travel that much? You said, don't let school get in the way of all that.
I'll tell you the funniest story that applies to that.
Hmm.
My major in college was radio, TV, film. My minor was police science. And the reason why my minor was police science is we were coming up against the police every day. I needed to know how they thought so I could cover them. And the final exam for my course in radio, TV, film was that I had to write, produce, and direct a 30-minute show for PBS that they'd air. We had the PBS affiliate in Madison. Well, they sent me back to Washington to cover the May Day March, where everybody got arrested and the National Guard was landing at the Washington Monument and Nixon was going crazy. And I'm out there covering it, getting tear gassed in Washington for Newsweek. And I get back to my hotel room on a Wednesday night, and there were no cell phones back there. There were no faxes or email. There was a message at the desk to call my roommate urgent back in Wisconsin. So I called him. He said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm in Washington, D.C. doing this big story." He said, "Do you have any idea what tomorrow is?" I said, "What's tomorrow?" He says, "It's your final exam in
I
radio,
knew
TV,
it.
and film." I had totally forgotten it, and I had to write, produce, and direct it, or I wouldn't graduate. So I went to the bureau chief, an amazing mentor of mine, sadly passed away about a year ago, named Mel Elfin. He was the Washington bureau chief for Newsweek. And I said, "Mel, sorry, but I could I take off tomorrow because I've got a final?" He looked at me, "What final? This is your final." And I said, I said, "All right, get out of here, but be back on Friday." So that night, about which would have been about 7 p.m. Wisconsin time, I called everybody I knew. I said, "Okay, you're going to be the camera guy. You're going to be the other camera guy. You're going to be the audio. You're going to be the floor director. I'm writing the script tonight." I took the very first flight the next morning. The exam was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I took the very first flight that next morning on North Central Airlines that stopped in Milwaukee, got into Madison at 11:15 in the morning. A friend of mine picked me up. We ran to a drugstore where they charged 25 cents for a photocopy and with all chemicals and all this. And I'm copying this big handwritten script I've done in big block letters that I wrote on the plane. We race out to the studio. We're there at 12:30. I get to do one run through, and then we did it live to tape at like 1:15 in the afternoon. I finished it at 1:45, and my friend then raced me back to the airport to catch the 2:40 flight, the last flight of the day that would connect me through Milwaukee back to Washington. And I got it done. Great. Everybody loved it. Uh, I get on the plane, I fly back to Washington, I get back to the hotel, and there's a message waiting for me from my roommate saying, "Another urgent call." I called him and he said, "Oh, you're in trouble." I said, "What?" He said, "Well, after you left, the professor came back to look at all the stuff and he viewed your show and he liked it a lot. And he said, 'Where's Peter? We were all here except you.' And they said, 'Oh, he flew back to DC.' He was so pissed off that you flew in and flew out that he failed you in the course.
Because you weren't there?
He was pissed off because I was actually in the real world.
Hmm.
What a surprise. So the minute I finished in Washington, the following Monday, he came back and I took him to court. I sued him. Guess who won?
I
Yeah,
hope
but
you.
here's an interesting lesson. And he gave me a C and I graduated. Cut to 20 years later, I'm given the Wisconsin Distinguished Service Award in Journalism at a big event in Madison, 1,000 people in the room at the Union. I brought my mom. One of my deans was there, who's one of my oldest and closest friends and my real true mentor. And I go to the acceptance speech, and who's sitting in the audience? That professor. And I had a choice. Do I mention it or not? And you know what? I let him have it. I
God.
didn't give a shit. I let him have it. But there's an irony to this and an epilogue that no one could see coming. His teaching assistant, who was sort of like his Hitler Youth, um, ended up becoming the guy who was running Wisconsin Public Television. All of my shows air on PBS. The only PBS affiliate to this day that does not run any of my shows is Madison, Wisconsin.
Oh,
And you
God.
know what? You know what? I don't give a shit. I still would have done it. But anyway, so much for diplomacy. But that'll give you an idea of how I came up through the ranks, how I graduated from Wisconsin, and how I finally ended up working for Newsweek and what I'm doing today.
Yeah, it's so amazing. You know, relationships are such valuable assets, or not relationships. And you know, you talk about, for example, getting to know the police. You talk about you know, people along the way that helped you in this and that. And then there's negative influence too, like the fellow you're talking about, that professor
Yes,
that
but you know what? It gets down to the conversation. And that's, you want to
right,
talk about leadership, it starts with conversation. Um, when I was working, studying the police, I made it a point to become friends, to get to know
right.
the toughest, no knock, beat the hell out of him cop in Madison. This guy would take no prisoners. I mean, literally, he was violent. Um, and his name was Tom McCarthy. And he didn't want to meet any hippie like me. And I couldn't be seen with any cop like him. So the only way we could finally meet was brokered through a friend of ours, was on the racquetball court. And I beat him. And and all of a sudden, I looked at him and said, okay, now that I beat you, can we sit down and talk? We became lifelong friends. In fact, he became friends, he and the dean who brokered it became friends with my parents. They had never been outside of Madison, Wisconsin. We flew them to New York and they spent a week with us. I'm still in school at this time. And my dad, we took them out. Oh, it was life changing. And they're both not with us anymore. But until he died, Tom McCarthy, and until Jack Sipperly, my dean, passed away, uh, there was not a week that I wasn't on the phone with them. There was not a month that I didn't see them. Um, and uh, and that had nothing to do with what I did for a living anymore. It had to do with the fact that I was alive, and wanted to and those relationships were literally lifelong and led to so many amazing experiences and friendships that last to this day.
Yeah, I find almost all the time a thread from when we're kids to present where your mom had all these people to call and just say hi to authentically with no agenda. You were doing the same thing, keeping in touch with people. You were listening, you were talking, you were having conversations, you were developing a relationship on the racquetball court, basically. But I
Yeah,
find so often that it starts with like a mom or whatnot showing the
it
way.
you know what it is? It starts, yeah, mom's got to lead the way, but it also starts with something else. You got to be a voracious reader or a consumer of information.
Hmm.
I don't own a Kindle. I like holding things in my hand, but I still read like 8 newspapers a day. That goes back to when I was 7.
Hmm.
Uh, and because at the end of the day, if you want to be a leader, you first have to establish common ground. Yeah, and it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with the person you're talking to. What's of interest and importance to them?
Right.
And are you truly interested in that? And the answer is yes, I want to learn. I start out by saying part of being smart is knowing what you're dumb at. And I'm dumb at a lot of things. And so, I will sit down with somebody and I mean, we take everything for granted. You ask kids where food comes today, they tell you the store. I don't think so. And so I really want to know how it got to way before it even got to me, how did it even get into my city, right? And I look around any room. It can be, I could be sitting on an airplane, I could be sitting in a movie theater, I could be, I could be just walking down the street. I look around me and I'll see 80 people, right? Nobody who I know. But what do I see in those 80 people? I see 80 fascinating stories waiting to be told. Now, they may not be fascinating storytellers. That's a fact. Most of them are not, but that doesn't take away
Yeah.
from the fact they're all having great stories. And I will probably be late to almost all my appointments because I want to hear those stories.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I believe it's Malcolm Gladwell that said you don't have to go to some exotic place to get a great story. Just ask the cashier at CBS what her story is and what's going on, you
Absolutely.
know.
It's amazing. And then you find common ground. I remember after I produced a number of movies, I did one with the Air Force, and the Navy came to me and they said, "We loved what you did with that movie. Uh, is there something you want to do with the Navy?" I said, "As a matter of fact, there is." And they said, "What?" And they said, "Forget it. It's never going to happen. It's our most top secret branch of the Navy. We've never given permission to anybody. You're not going to get it." I said, "But if I were to get it, who would give it to me?" And they said it would be CINCPAC, the Commander in Chief of the Pacific, the admiral running the whole Pearl Harbor fleet in Honolulu. I said, "Well, can you get me a meeting with him?" I said, "You're going to fly all the way to Honolulu for this guy to say no?" I said, "Yeah." So they said, "Okay, you have a meeting with him this coming Monday at 9 a.m. for 15 minutes. Don't be late." So at 8 o'clock, I'm at the gate to Pearl Harbor. I'm then ushered into his office at 10 minutes of 9. His office is the size of a small football field. Everybody's in their dress whites. This is the big admiral. And he clearly didn't want to meet me. He was told to meet me. He was sort of like, meet him, give him a handshake, give him a commemorative coin, and get him out of here. It's one of those meetings. And I realized, being a journalist, but also having done this for so many years, about looking for common ground, that once I said hi to him, I had about 15 seconds to find something that would establish common ground.
Right.
And I got lucky. He didn't even look up from his desk when I was introduced to him. And behind his desk, hanging on the wall, was a photograph. And I knew from a long time ago that whatever they hang behind their wall is the most important thing to them they want you to see.
Right.
And what he had hanging behind his wall was a photograph of a small boat. Turns out I knew that boat very well and actually longer than he did. I mean, I just lucked out. And I said to him, "Admiral, is that a Bertram 31?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "That's the best boat they ever built." He said, "Damn straight." I said, "But let me ask you a question. The water pump leaks, doesn't it?" He said, "Wait, wait." And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Look, there's an easy fix for that. You got to run a separate hose from the impeller and out to one of your valves. You're not going to have a problem." I said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah. People make the same mistake, and next thing you know, your bilge pump is filling up. You don't need to do that. Just get an extra hose, put it on the impeller, you'll be fine." I said, "Really?" I said, "Wait, I got one more for you. When you make a hard right turn, the starboard engine cavitates, right?" He said, "Yeah. You got to put a separate flight plate on it, above the outdrive, and it'll completely stop the problem because you got Merc engines with Chevy blocks, and it's just too powerful." He said, "You're right." And all of a sudden, we spent 15 minutes on this, right? And now the captain comes over and says, "Admiral, your 915 is here." And the admiral looks at me and he goes, "You got lunch plans?" I said, "Admiral, I'm all yours." He said, "Okay, officers club at noon." By the time lunch was over, an hour later, at 1 p.m., all hell breaks loose at Pearl Harbor and all hell breaks loose at the Pentagon. Why? Because he gave me permission to be the first journalist given a top security clearance to go on an attack nuclear submarine on a classified mission.
Well,
And when the Pentagon found out, his name was Bernard Cowderer, the Rear Admiral. And when the Pentagon found out that he'd given me permission, they went so nuts, they insisted he had to go with me. And he did. And guess what? a relationship formed.
Yeah.
And I will just cut to something that will surprise you. Uh, about 3 years later, there was a movie made as a result of the story that I did and the access that I had, right? It was based on a book that you'll know. But the reason why the movie got made was because of my relationship with that admiral. And the name of that movie was The Hunt for Red October.
Wow.
And and when they had the premiere at the White House, Reagan was still president. I was sitting next to the admiral. And now I had nothing to do with the movie, other than to tell you that with the exception of a Soviet submarine captain defecting, which did not happen on my mission, everything you saw that happened in that movie happened on my trip.
Wow.
So, and that all started with me finding common ground on a picture of a boat in the middle. I mean, who knew, right?
Yeah, I think it starts even before. It starts with the curiosity and imagination that it was ignited early on, and you're looking for things to have the conversations to get that common ground, and you're interested, like for real interested,
Right.
not bullshit
Oh
interested.
yeah, I'm not playing games. I really want to know. And
Right.
in fact, and coincidentally, it leads to something that's great. But what it will always lead to will be a continuing relationship if you want one. And the answer is I do.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's not to be cute. That's what leaders who care get. They care about learning about the truth. They care about other people. They want to know. The other part you're talking about, the knowledge that your mom taught you with reading newspapers, allows you to engage effectively with other people like
You
that.
know what? It allows you with enough information to get in trouble.
Well, that's good trouble, as somebody
Yeah,
used to
yeah,
say,
yeah.
in that respect. Moving to your days with the networks, because we don't have time to do a feature film here, but we do, as you know, in LA, we say you got to keep them wanting more, so we can do a so we can do a sequel. So we may have to look at that. But what's your day, week, month look like when how do with there's a research decisions on where you go, why you go, et cetera, and what you do?
Well, 80% of what I do is generated by me. The other 20% obviously is breaking news that you have to respond to. But in a given week, month, or 3 month window, I'm traveling 3 to 4 days a week. We just calculated that in 2025, I was on 134 planes.
Well,
That's a lot. I'm not complaining because I'm constantly putting out the fires that I set.
hmm
But of those 134 individual flights, I would say three-quarters of that were generated by me. The other one quarter is, hey, there's a terrible airplane crash that just happened, or they've just closed the border, or an airline has gone out of business, or there's a cruise ship a norovirus outbreak. I mean, things that you would just normally cover.
hmm
I'm also a volunteer firefighter in New York. I've been a firefighter since I'm 18, and so there's that aspect of it as well because I will be called in from time to time as a journalist to cover stories clearly because of my access as a firefighter.
Plus, you look good in a helmet.
Yeah. The help, by the way, people don't realize when you put the uniform on, that weighs 85 pounds.
And they don't have the uniforms they're starting to get for women specifically.
Right. But I'm saying when you're leaving the firehouse on a run, obviously the helmet, you're wearing the Nomex suit, and in your pockets are extra gloves, extra socks, and at least 4 bottles of water, because if you don't hydrate, you're done.
Hmm.
But so you're wearing a lot, but you have to learn how to do that.
Yeah, that's incredible. You've worked for three networks. You currently work for CBS and whatnot.
Wh- Which means I can't hold the job, but that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, well, same with us in our business. No one wants to employ
Yeah.
us. That's why we're headhunters. But what is that like working for three competitors, and what's it just like working for a network exec?
Well, you have to start out with a sad assumption that they do not understand that travel is news. So you have to educate them. Travel stories are not about what's the great deal of the week or tips on packing. I go way beyond that. I'm
I
an
hope so.
investigative reporter that goes back to my days at Newsweek. So I think that the audience wants to know more about which cruise ship's a floating fire trap and which airline has the worst maintenance than they do about lovely London and beautiful Bermuda, because anybody can tell them that. Now, it doesn't mean I don't do destination pieces, but whether it's ABC, NBC, or CBS, there's a process that I go through and have gone through by necessity to educate those executives as to what makes a good story. They might know what a good story is politically. They might know what a good story is in terms of breaking news and other things, or sports or religion. But when it comes to travel, they don't realize that travel is the largest service industry in the world.
Mm,
It's 11% of global GDP. There are 93 countries that if they didn't have travel, the governments would become unstable and collapse because they'd have no economic support. And so when you put things in those terms, every once in a while, and more often than not, you can give them stories that they will say, yes, please go do that. Um, Otherwise, and it's all about the process of travel, not necessarily the destination. And once they do that, then they find out very quickly that that's what the audience wants, and the ratings show it. You know, they could actually show at every network I've been that when I'm on the air, and this has nothing to do with my sparkling personality, it has to do with the information I'm giving, that the ratings spike in that little segment because people will stick around for it because it's something they want,
hmm.
because it speaks to their self-interest. You know, when you take a look at the audience, which is much more important than the network, there are three areas of coverage that will always work with an audience, because they're the three areas that are not political, that they speak to their self-interest: medical, health, and travel. So it's personal wealth and finance, personal health and wellness, and travel. And you can't miss if you give people information they can truly use in
Right.
any of those three areas.
No, that's amazing. And how does it come to be? Were you recruited from one network to another? How does how did that, is there a is there an NDA? Is there a non-solicit? Is there a
No,
non-disclosure?
no, no. I had a contract at all three networks, but what happens is, executives change.
Right.
And so at ABC, when the executive who was running Good Morning America retired, and they brought in another executive, uh, they didn't care about me. At that moment, um, Jeff Zucker, who was then running the Today Show, who then went on to become, of course, the chairman of NBC, uh, he'd been watching me for years. He grabbed me,
Mm.
and I was there for 14 years. And then when NBC was being sold to Comcast, they didn't want me. And by that time, Katie Couric had moved from NBC to CBS and was doing the evening news. And she brought me over to CBS, and I've been there now for 17 years.
Welcome to relationships are valuable again, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Remember, travel is that one common denominator that is not a red state or a blue state issue. It has nothing to do with income. It has nothing to do with education. If you put me in an elevator with a janitor and the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, neither will let me out of the elevator until I answer their question. And remarkably, more often than not, it's the same question.
Mm. Which is,
Hey, I'm thinking of going here. What's the best way to go? What's the best way to do it? How do I not get screwed? Right? Now, they're asking from a different perspective. The janitor's asking because money is a big issue.
right.
The CEO is asking because that's how they became CEO.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think about it's being used for a lot of seniors who can't travel and a lot of people who don't have the money to travel? What do you think about VR, AR, and some of the very advanced ways that you're traveling virtually?
Well, listen, as a last resort, why not?
Right.
Look, my parents allowed me the opportunity to travel, but for the last 40 years of their life, they didn't.
Hmm.
And that was, I mean, I as long as my mom was healthy, I traveled, I took her. I repaid the favor. I literally took her around the world. My dad had health issues and really didn't travel. I mean, I get to see, forgetting just my parents, I'm always aware of this, and I always knock on as much wood as I can. I get to do and see in one 3-day period what other people dream their whole entire lives and never do.
Right.
And I am forever grateful for that. I take nothing for granted.
Right.
Uh, I mean, my goodness. I mean, nothing cavalier about that.
Yeah, I think it's having lived here in California and Miami at times, just right near the beach. It's the same thing. I don't take one day for granted because sometimes that's the dream vacation of a lifetime. Just going inside.
So,
I get it.
so VR is the only option offered to someone who can't travel, I'm 100% supportive of it.
Yeah.
However, however, I do believe, with obviously there are exceptions to this, you'll always have a way, with some exceptions, to be able to take somebody physically and have them go somewhere if you're determined enough to do it and do enough homework ahead, right? I mean, I remember uh, when Charles Lindbergh was dying and he wanted to go home and be buried in Hawaii. That means he had to fly. And so, and he was really too sick to walk
Hmm.
and too sick to be in a chair. You know what they did? United Airlines said, you know what? We're gonna make this happen. And so they it was a 747, and they developed a separate stretcher for him. They brought him on the stretcher, and they had about six people doing this. And remember the circular stairway on the 747?
Sure.
They got him up the stairway. They arranged four seats in a row, lying flat, to put the stretcher on next to the upstairs windows. And then he was still conscious. And then they got special permission from air traffic control that as they neared Hawaii, they diverted on their flight plan and they did a slow right bank over every Hawaiian island at like 1,500 feet. So he had one last look. And he died, I think, 2 days later.
Wow.
So you know what? I'm listen,
Where there's a will, there's a way, right?
I hope, yeah.
Yeah, that's spectacular. There's nothing like it for a 6 month old or let's say a 2 or 3 year old that remembers. It's still fantastic experience. And the knowledge you pick up, I'm preaching to the choir here, is invaluable and stuff. How do you combine as your own entrepreneur with your own, Peter Greenberg Worldwide? How do you combine? How does that fit into all your other work?
Well, that's the challenge because I'm not Mr. Transaction. I don't look at myself as a businessman. I look at myself as a journalist who produces,
Hmm.
but you have to be a business person to do it. Um, but the good news about working and doing productions for, let's say, PBS, is you know what your budgets are going to be. You know your crews. You know where they are. I mean, I work with crews now in 16 different countries. Um, and I've worked with them before, so we have a good language that we speak. We have a good shortcut that we speak.
Yeah,
Um, I have to deal with uh, government officials, ministers, presidents, and heads of state. But that goes back to my days as a journalist. So I'm sort of a half a journalist and half a diplomat. Uh,
I bet.
and then, dealing with the stereotypical images that I try to fight all the time about what a good travel show can be. You know, uh, we're not doing infomercials. We're not doing promotions. We're not doing ads. We never give anybody the right of editorial control or review. That's a no. That's a non-starter for me in any kind of negotiation. And that's not because I take myself so seriously. Not only is it a standard and practice of the network, but because my audience takes me that seriously.
Right.
So sort of every negotiation starts on those basic facts and those basic premises that are not negotiable. And then from there, we do okay. Um, in many cases, the shows that we do are in spite of the business, are in spite of their agenda,
Hmm.
as it should be most of the time. I'm not fighting them, but sometimes I have to do it in spite of them.
Well, I think people respect, especially audience. I think people can tell authenticity. They can tell, they can trust, and that you build on that, and it's also worth its weight in gold when people get that and they know that the source is bringing them the real stuff.
I remember once I wrote a column for the LA Times, which I did for many, many years, and there was an advertiser in the Times who I'd mentioned in my story, and I sort of nailed them, and they deserved to be nailed. And they picked up the phone and they called the ad guys at the LA Times and said, "Okay, just because of that, we're pulling our ads." And somebody very brilliantly at the LA Times said, "That's okay with us, but they have to stay out for a year." That conversation ended, right?
I bet it did.
Another time, one of my editors, top executives at the network, you know, sort of believed what I said, but didn't really know if I was, right. And so they picked up the phone. They called the CEO of the airline I had written about and I talked about, and they said, "What do you think of Peter Greenberg?" And they gave me the best compliment I could have ever gotten. We don't agree with him, but we have no problem with what he said. Well, then I rest. Thank you. I'm done.
It's the
You
best
know,
testimonial ever. I know that's
and
fantastic.
people are always saying to me, "How do you keep your advertisers when you dump on them?" I said, "Well, if I'm wrong, I should quit, and if I'm not wrong, they should redo what they're doing." And so, I will. I mean, there's not a month that goes by that I'm not calling out an airline for being either arrogant, wrong, misleading, or lying. Um, and by the way, uh, I have three airlines that still advertise on my shows, and those are the airlines I sometimes call out. So it's got to be that way,
Well,
right?
again,
If I
it does.
lose them,
I
huh?
would think then it goes back to relationship again, depending on the person that
Yeah.
if they feel you're being truthful, then maybe the best way to work together is thanks for the information. We're going to fix it or something like that.
Well, yeah, that would be the old days. That doesn't happen
No.
these days. No, because now we live in a very litigious world. If you say that we're going to sue, I say, great. By the way, I'll show you what I have in discovery. The suit will be over. So and we get to that a lot of times.
Yeah. No,
I mean,
I
if you're saying that Boeing committed fraud and that Boeing lied to regulators consistently, come on, sue me. I have the emails to prove it,
hmm
right? Um, and if I say the FAA is not doing their job, and they've never done their job since they were established by an act of Congress 90 years ago, you want to come after me? Come after me. I've got the documents. What I want to do is to make sure Congress makes you do your job, right? I can advocate for that as an investigative reporter. Not only that, as a passenger, right? So those are those relationships.
Well, and that's what I think an audience probably appreciates. They might not know all the details behind the scenes, but you get to know that that they're getting the truth, and it's a trusted source.
I mean, I remember we were doing a story on a president, one of my Royal Tour series, and there was a scene that his gatekeepers didn't like, and they said, if you don't take that scene out, he's not showing up for the premiere. I said, tell him not to show up. Tell him not to show up, and I'll tell him what you tried to do. Guess what? He showed up and loved it. I mean, so you have those battles every single day because everybody wants to control the narrative, good, bad, or ugly.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. How do you see, just a couple more questions on this part. Um, how do you see the future? We're talking about flying cars. We're talking about AI, obviously up the wazoo. We're talking about different planets. Hospitality, it's a big industry, hospitality, and especially in the airlines. What does the future look like in your mind?
To me, the future in the short term looks bleak, and I'll tell you why. There's the promise of AI and there's the threat of AI, and we're living in a world that's dominated by what I call the CFO mentality. And the CFO mentality is only obsessed with cost, not value.
hmm
And they will take a look at AI as it's just a wonderful opportunity to cut costs, cut jobs, cut careers, and they will substitute AI for basic common sense and rational decision making. And it'll end the conversation as we know it. It'll redefine the conversation. It'll be a different conversation, but there'll be no vetting. How do you seek the truth? When I was at Newsweek, the hour and the day I dreaded every week was 3 p.m. on the West Coast on a Friday afternoon, because that was the day I had to get on the phone call with the fact checkers in New York. And it was more than just dotting every I and crossing every T. If I couldn't provide two corroborating independent sources for every quote I had in my story, the story didn't run. Today, nobody even cares. They just run the story.
Right.
Uh, that is really scary because at the end of the day, I'd like my audience to know they can trust me, and hopefully most of them will. But somebody coming new to my writing or to my reporting who doesn't know me, how do they know to trust me? Where's the vetting,
Right.
right? And the answer is it's not there. And that can easily be manipulated. It already has been. It and the audience, forget the reading of the 8 newspapers a day, or forgetting the old fact checking system. We have a cultural disconnect now where
Yeah.
people don't care, and they're just going to say, "Oh, it confirms my bias. I'll go with that."
Not to
When
mention it's all about sound bites. Never mind reading 7 newspapers. It's about sound bites.
right, right, and now I go online, and I may be exaggerating, but not by much. I think 6 out of the 8 videos I see are generated by AI, and they're so good, I have
Yeah.
to stop myself and go, wait a minute. And as a journalist who's covering these stories and visual stories, how do I go with that video? Because I can't verify it. I can't verify it. And by the way, that's me as a journalist. But the consuming public out there, they don't have to verify it. They just have to believe it. And that's where we have a problem.
Like that virtual actress that became that agents started calling up like crazy, thought she was real,
Oh yeah.
and she wasn't. Man.
Oh, listen, we had a situation recently in Canada where just a consumer went online to book a ticket and was immediately sent to a chatbot, didn't want to talk to the chatbot, had no choice. And whatever the chatbot told him, about six different items, was either so wrong, so misleading, or so dangerous that he never made his flight, ended up getting completely, I mean, it was terrible. And you know what he did? He takes Air Canada to court and sues them. Air Canada stupidly decided to defend this case. And you know what their defense was? You can't sue us. The chatbot has a mind of its own. Wait a minute. It's your chatbot, you
You're
idiots. Of
right.
course, the judge saw through that defense and threw it out. But the point is, this is where we're heading. And it's to me, it's not particularly uplifting or pleasant.
Yeah, it's difficult. I a really quick story. A friend of mine, she's a writer in New York and whatnot, and she got up in the middle of the night. I don't know if I shared this when we met, and it was about 3:30, and she's half asleep, whatever. And she was asking Alexa something, and she said, and it's not working. She said, "What's wrong with you? Are you broken?" And Alexa answers her, "It's 3:30 in the morning. You're talking to me that way. Maybe you're broken."
Whoa. Okay, Your Honor, I rest my case. We're in
Right,
trouble.
exactly.
We're in trouble. And
Exactly.
and so for the world of journalism, I'm scared. For the world of just basic information, I'm scared. And for the world of trying to get up every morning to seek out and find common ground, I'm scared.
Yeah, well, we have a program called Nonflict that can help in that, but that's a different conversation. I have one last question on this part. A client told me in 2021 about the pandemic year, 2020, he said, Mark, that's the year that flew by slowly. And I thought, what a great comment, because for a lot of people, it feels like it's yesterday and years ago at the same time still, COVID. And now we're already in 2026. What do you think you're most grateful for, and what are you most hopeful for?
Well, if you go back to COVID, yes, it flew by slowly, and thank God it did, because forgetting the terrible toll it took medically and on people's lives, but at individual people, it changed their outlook because we became up close and personal with our own sense of mortality. It forced us to have conversations,
Hmm.
right? Husbands and wives who had two different occupations all of a sudden found themselves sitting in the same house 5 days in a row. Oh my goodness. Uh, you know, Either good, bad, or ugly, but it certainly clarified things. Um, and so I'm grateful for that. Now, having said that, uh, what I've learned from that is that the world has gotten smaller. Uh, Everything's instantaneous now. There's no waiting. When we talk about uh, current events, you go back 50, 60, 70 years ago with people at the end of World War II saying, we really didn't see Hitler coming. We never thought it was going to happen. We didn't move fast enough. Well, then you have to put it in perspective. News didn't travel that fast,
Hmm.
right? It could take weeks for something to get to a community. Now we have no excuse.
100%.
And so in a way, I'm a little scared about the technology that moves that fast, but at the same time, I'm thankful for the fact that we have no excuse. We are now forced to act on what we see in front of us, that if we can believe it and if it's true, no excuses, guys. We have to act.
No, it's beautiful. No, thanks for all that. I'm grateful for having a new friend. So thanks for that. And
Likewise.
I'm hopeful that I'm hopeful about people like you that are still trying to have those conversations and be truthful, and all the words that are not fluffy but they're actually really important. Keep happening. So thanks for being a leader who cares, and thanks for joining us. And I really appreciate it. I look for a lot more, hopefully.
You got it, Mark, and thank you for doing this. And just remember, as my mom said, more important to be interested than interesting.